So in terms of implementation, I guess I've just got some, on the next one, I've just got some key points around implementation, and I'm sure none of this is new or different to anything that you're doing at the moment. But again, just going back to having really good assessment and reporting processes helps implementation. We've had, and I'm sure you're all experiencing this as well, is that lots of people have lots of different mealtime management plans in their files. So some people have two different ones that have been dated at two different times. So one's a newer one and they've still got the older one in their file. And then the one that's in the kitchen folder doesn't match either of them or matches one of them. We've also had situations where key workers, well-intentioned and because they think they should or because they think that, or because they've been told to, have developed their own mealtime management plan as well. So again, at that point of assessment, making sure that they've only got the current mealtime management plan for that person in the person's current file, and that matches with the file that's in the kitchen as well. As much as we can, and this is sometimes a little bit hit and miss, is involving the key worker and the coordinator in the mealtime plan as well, and making that really, really clear that this is the expectation and requirement around doing a good mealtime assessment. So I've already mentioned we've probably got a little bit more work to do around making our reporting more accessible, and we are working on that, in balancing it with having the right information in it as well. But what we do is explain all of our terminology, hopefully well. Obviously involving the client in the assessment and planning process, and really talking to them and getting their opinions and explaining things in the best way you can to the client as well. Staff training and support has been, again, something that's been a little bit hit and miss. So some service providers are really keen for training and they'll invite us along to their team meetings and for us to provide education, but others are finding it difficult to release staff, and some are not interested in training and support for the team. So I guess, again, it's about making sure that we're offering it and that we're, in the new world, building it into people's plans as well, so that we do have adequate training. And my personal opinion is that I think all people that are providing support services for people with intellectual disabilities need proper training and proper support around implementation of mealtime management plans. And I don't think we're there yet in the sector. So it would be really nice to see this space. And we're working on, our team are working on something at the moment that we're going to trial hopefully in the Western region a little bit later in the year. Excuse me, so I can keep you posted on how that goes. Oh, and I've already mentioned about the mealtime summary and just making sure that the carers are involved in how that's used and how do they want to use it in their context. So in all of this, I guess the challenge is, how do we do this and how do we do it well as a private provider, as a fee-for-service model? And I think the NDIS provides a real opportunity for doing this and for doing it well. And we just need to do it. I think we as speech pathologists, wherever we're working at the moment, need to manage this in a way that's going to provide the best outcomes and opportunities for people to get the right supports into their plan. So I must admit, I'm working with a lot of people who are transitioning at the moment to NDIS, but not anyone who's actually been on an NDIS plan. So I would be really keen to talk to anyone from the, excuse me, from the Hunter who has actually worked with people on a plan and how to support people to get the most out of their plan. But I did attend an NDIA briefing yesterday and specifically asked questions about how can I as a clinician support people to get the right support within their plans. Because we're talking now about first plans and we're talking about unmet needs and gaps in services. And I think that most of the people that I work with, adults with intellectual disabilities in group homes or transitioning from large residential centres, have unmet needs in terms of their dysphagia needs. And so just ignore that attachment there because I've actually updated it since yesterday. But I specifically said, would outlining the number of hours that are required for somebody to meet their needs, I'm really sorry, to meet their needs around dysphagia be helpful in the planning process? And the response was absolutely yes. So, like I said, I'd be really happy and interested to talk to anyone in the Hunter that can provide any further information on this. But I have put together a bit of an appendix, and I printed a few off last night, so I've got them with me, that talks about, from what I see, the clinically important parts about supporting someone with dysphagia and what hours, based on that individual's needs, I can project that they would need. So it includes review schedule by a speech pathologist, what other professionals need to be involved in the review and support for this person, is carer and staff training required for the person, and what does that need to look like? Is implementation support required? Does the person require specialist mealtime equipment? And can we build that into their plan as well? And does the person require training and implementation support to be provided in other environments like day program? So, like I said, I've got a few of these printed off, and I'd be really keen to talk to anyone who's interested in talking about this. And I've got a few people that I'm working with now who are transitioning or who are having their planning meetings as we speak and next week. So we'll see whether this actually is a functional and helpful tool for people to make sure they get the right support, the right number of hours allocated in their plans. So moving on to some of the kind of key learnings and the things that I'm still learning as a private provider in this space is to keep it focused on the individual, of course, but I think at the moment there is so much going on for people with intellectual disabilities, and particularly people who are transitioning and in multiple points of transition, and things can, and staff are transitioning as well. And I think that's a key issue here, is that staff are also expected to do something different, and they're transitioning to a new working environment, potentially new organisations. And how do we still keep it focused on the individual and the individual's needs within that context? So just keep bringing it back to the safety and support needs of the individual. Developing communities of practice, and I guess I mean this on several levels as well. So as an ADAC practitioner, you have an inbuilt community of practice. You have other speech pathologists, you have OTs, dietitians, physios, nurses, all at your in your same office and in your same space that you get to talk to all the time. So as a private provider, you need to create that for yourself. You need to be able to develop relationships with other speech pathologists that provide similar services, and you need to create those links with other providers as well. And it will depend on your working context. So if you're working for an NGO, you may have a smaller team, but I would recommend that you still develop your own community of practice outside of that. So you need to be able to ring somebody and just have a really quick chat. And sometimes that's hard in private practice, but if you get the right community of practice around you, I think it makes it easier and much more collaborative, I suppose, in making sure that you're covering everything and checking your thinking. The other thing I think that it allows you to do is develop working relationships so that you can refer on and be referred to as well. So if you're working with OTs in a particular area, that you know that that's the person that you can go to and refer to or recommend. So appropriate supervision is such a crucial aspect of quality services, and as a private provider, I guess it might not be something that everyone's thought about as well, and even some organisations who are developing clinical teams now, because that's happening, or expanding clinical teams, it may not be something that the employer has thought about either. And so I guess it's going to depend on each individual as to what your supervision needs and whether it needs to be a collegial supervision arrangement where you've got an arrangement with another experienced practitioner, or if you're earlier on in your practice, how are you going to get that supervision that you need, and how are you going to have those conversations with your employer about what your requirements are and how you meet it. And this has actually been really, really, over the last, I think, 6 months, I guess, I've been able to really create some strong relationships with GPs, but it does take time and you do need to be quite persistent. So I think once you actually build that relationship, it can be very, very useful and very collaborative, but it does take ringing the practice and asking what's a good time to call, getting the email of the person. And I think once you then make that contact, what I've noticed, I guess, is that that GPs actually find working with this population of people just as challenging as we do. And they actually really like having that relationship. So I've got some really nice contacts that are GP, and because of, I guess, the context that I'm working in at the moment, is that there are a group of GPs that tend to work with people in large residential centres, and there are groups of GPs within spaces in the community that work with a number of people in group homes. So really make an effort to get in contact and connect with your GPs. Yes, be prepared. So I really can't stress this enough in private practice, because a lot of the work that we do is based on efficiencies as well. So we need to be really efficient in getting the work done to be able to properly have a business, I guess. And that goes for whether it's an NGO organisation or whether you're working privately for yourself. So in terms of being prepared, I think that includes really setting up appointments, taking the time before the appointment to set it up properly. So I've already spoken about making sure the key worker and the caseworker are there on the day, trying to get it at the time of the day that's going to be best for the individual, making sure that you're out there at that time. And we've found that breakfast is a good time for that. Request any documents before the appointment. So if you can, nutrition and swallowing risk checklists, past reports, current mealtime management plans, getting emailed through to you before you actually go out there. And then depending on the questions that are marked yes on the nutrition and swallowing checklist, sending out data collection forms so you can get a little bit more information about what you think you need to be able to do a good job for the assessment for that person. And I think, again, going back to what I was saying in terms of making sure that people get the right support levels in their plans as well, is that if we can do that well, then we give ourselves time to do the assessment and the implementation well. But if we don't have that right and someone turns up with 5 hours in their plan, then we can't do any of this really well. So I think it all hinges back on making sure that we as a profession now, working with people transitioning to the NDIS, make sure that we do that part well, and that's part of the preparation. And I guess I'm happy to admit that I've been in situations where I've been very prepared and it's worked very well, and situations where I've been very unprepared, sometimes not my fault, but sometimes my fault, and it hasn't gone as well. And then it creates more backtracking, it creates more going back, wasting time, and generally not doing a good job for the client. Thorough file review. And I can't stress how important this is in the context that I work, which is with adults with intellectual disabilities as well, and people who have moved around and transitioned from environments. And I've had situations recently where I thought that I'd done a pretty good file review and got some pretty good information, and then I've randomly come across a document that says that this person had an aspiration pneumonia 2 years ago. And it's not actually clearly documented in any healthcare plan. It's not ticked on the nutrition and swallowing checklist. It might have even been just a kind of sub-note in a psychiatric report because it had happened just before the psychiatrist had seen the person. And so then coming back and being able to think, we'll put that into the mix of your thinking, I guess, around what does this mean if this person does have that history. And if you've got good links with your GP, then you can go back to the GP and say, hey, this person had an aspiration pneumonia back in March 2014. Do you know anything about that? And funnily enough, this has only happened to me recently, and the GP was like, oh yes, I did know that had happened, and it had also happened 2 years before that. So I think we need to, I think it's an opportunity then to document that this is a real risk for that person, and I guess it's documenting it in the right way in a report that's about mealtime support needs. So I have spent my whole career almost trying to avoid getting around with a suitcase. But I've succumbed to and I have accepted that a suitcase is actually necessary. And we do carry a suitcase around with us all the time when we're doing mealtime assessments. And we've got a range of bits and pieces in our assessment, which I'm sure you guys have got as well. But some of the things that we've got are a range of modified utensils, plates, bowls, cups, and things that we tend to use all the time. Some Dyson matting, some thicken up, and a range of different textured foods, which are not actually in that suitcase because we have a separate little esky bag for those. Yeah. So we do turn up with a suitcase and an esky bag to people's homes sometimes. This is also in our wheelie bag, and it's got a range of things in it that I use all the time and suggest that the group homes put together something similar to this. And in it is the nutrition and swallowing procedures and guidelines, the Ombudsman's report of reviewable deaths, the Ombudsman's fact sheets, modified meal information sheets, signs of unsafe swallowing, the Australian Standards poster on texture modified foods and fluids, and the Pirate poster. And so then if I'm talking with someone about the nutrition and swallowing risk checklist, or talking with someone about, or a coordinator about how to structure their services so that they're supporting their staff in the best way possible to do a good job with the nutrition and swallowing checklist, is get one of these together so that you can keep, so that it's in their face basically, and that they've got access to it, and that you model referring to it all the time when you're doing it. And when I'm talking to people about things that they've ticked yes on the nutrition and swallowing checklist, I've got this handy so I can just quickly flick to the question that we're talking about. And it really, I guess, allows you to talk about risk in a very real context for an individual, whereas I think, as illustrated before and on several times when people are just redating the nutrition and swallowing checklist, they're not really seeing it as risk for an individual. They're just seeing it as a broad policy that doesn't really matter. And I've had comments like, well, no one's ever looked at it before. And they have, because they've looked at it in the CERT audit, but they're not looking at the quality of it and they're not asking questions about it. So if it's done, it's done. If it's dated, it's dated, and it's good, but it's not. Very, very 100% necessary is to have good internal systems. You need to have, I've got, whether it's fairly basic things like lots of different Excel spreadsheets to help you organise your information and organise and plan what you're doing, or whether it's a more sophisticated database or client information system, it needs to be really good. And I can't stress enough, if you to set the time up, to give yourself time to set that up properly, because it's going to save you a lot of time in the future. And I can tell you, this is something that I've learned and still learning. And you need to tweak it. You're never going to get the right system straight up. You're never going to get it right first time, and you will have to keep working on it. But I think if you can give yourself enough time to get a really good start on how you're going to work your service, then you're in a good place. And I think it links back to, and I guess from a private practitioner, which is really different to working in a government service, is that you can say to someone, well, I think that this person should have a review every 3 months, and then we put it back and it's within a government system. So we're hoping that there's a check and balance in there about that this person does actually get a review in 3 months, whereas the world that we're moving to is not going to be like that. So I think as practitioners, we need to take a level of responsibility around how we track and develop internal systems for just making a reminder. Now, of course, an individual can make a decision about who they want to deliver that service. So we can make a clinical recommendation that somebody's reviewed in 3 months' time, but that person can choose to go to someone else. They don't have to come back to you. And that's okay, but I think we've definitely got some level of responsibility to have a check there that we've just reminded someone that this person needs a review. So the other thing, I guess, is that people will find that they will work with organisations, with individuals within the same organisation, if that makes sense. So it might be an NGO provider of accommodation services. And the other key thing that I've learned as well is to develop really good systems with that organisation. So make sure that you're meeting the right person within the organisation to develop a system that works for both of you around how you disseminate information, how you book appointments, how you set reminders, and who you generally communicate with to get things happening in that organisation. So lastly, just don't be afraid of new ideas, I think. My team and I are constantly going out and coming back and saying, oh, I've got a new idea about how we can do this differently. And I think governance is all about continual quality improvement. So if we can keep coming back to ourselves and saying, okay, we've had these experiences, how are we going to do it differently? Or we've got this new idea because we've just seen something else or we've been to training, how can we integrate it into our practice? And we can do that as private practitioners fairly easily. You just need to make sure you've got the time, I guess.